Michael Kirby, AC, CMG, former High Court judge. You are an icon. You're a patron for Qtopia Sydney. This is your baby, so to speak.
Well, my partner says I'm only an iconette, so, but I'd be proud to have had some role in Qtopia and in the development of the idea. It's long overdue.
For me, as an Australian queer person, your story, you paved the way for many thousands.
I got down there and I paved a way.
You did it yourself?
No, I did it with my partner Jan, who was very important, still is in my life, and who it was. He's from the Netherlands and they're very difficult people and very honest and rather brutal. And he said, we've got to stand up for the younger people. And so I did as normal, I obeyed. And I'm glad I did.
You've been in a relationship with your partner nearly 55 years.
Correct.
That's a long time.
Not
you get
long
less
enough.
Not long enough?
We've still got a little mileage on the motor.
You get less for murder, I say. I've been with my partner for 5 years.
Oh, well, you've started. That's we were 5 years ourselves. But by that time, we had gone on a combi trip overland. This was Johan's idea.
Right.
And we both agree that was a wonderful time in our lives, and it was a rare moment when you could easily drive overland.
I want to talk to you. Obviously, there's a lot of honorifics and you've achieved so much greatness in your career, but I want to talk to you as a human, because you are a human, I think.
Well, almost.
55 years with the love of your life. What do you love about Johan?
He is very clean, very hardworking, very honest, very direct, and he and I just get on well together. We ultimately gave up watching television so that after I came home after a hard day's work, we could just sit there and talk. He reads widely. He reads mostly history and biography. He tells me about his books, and we've just got a lot in common. And after 55 years, it's just comes natural.
When you got together with Johan, where did you meet? How did you meet?
We met in the Rex Hotel, the Bottoms Up bar, and Johan was there. I had just lost the love of my life for about 10 weeks, my first lover, and he came back from New Zealand with me and then immediately left for Melbourne. And I'd paid his economy seat over from New Zealand. And I was very resentful. And then 3 weeks later, I met Johan. And my partner, my former partner from Spain, said, you didn't mourn for long enough. But we've been together since essentially that night.
So you've had two loves in your life?
Well, I've had lots of loves in the sense of affection, and I've had my family, and I've still got a very loving and strong family bond. But in terms of a same-sex partner, I've really only had Jan, and I'm quite happy with that situation.
I want to talk about the fact that when you got together, it was illegal to, not necessarily, was it illegal to be gay, or was it illegal to practice being gay? The sexual act of...
The sexual act was what the criminal law focused on, but the result of that criminal provision, which was common throughout the British Empire, everywhere the Union Jack ever flew, there was this crime. But you see, I had grown up in the time when Dr. Kinsey did his research. He produced his first book, Sexual Behaviour in the Human Male, in 1946, when I was 6. So that really showed that I was not the only gay in the village, that there was a steady percentage of members of the population who were exclusively gay, that many had periods when they had gone through a gay phase, and my phase seemed never to go away, and therefore we were a natural fit, Johan and I.
So you were 30 when you met Johan, and
29, please.
29.
We were both desperately anxious that we were about to turn 30.
Because that's so old.
Oh, so old, yes. Well,
Bottoms Up Bar, was that a queer space? Was that?
yes, it was. And it's actually, there is now a cafe there, and the building has changed, but we know when we enter the cafe exactly where we were at the time we met. And we often go back there on the 11th of February of the year to rekindle the memories. Johan is not nostalgic. He's not romantic. I'm Irish and therefore I am nostalgic and romantic, but Johan is practical, sensible, organised, and he knows what he wants and he goes to and gets it.
Leading up to meeting Johan, as a young man, did you know that you were gay?
Oh, of course I did. I have spoken with people who said they didn't know, it was just a terrible shock to them, and it took a long time to get over, but I knew of a same-sex attraction around about the age of 11.
Wow.
And no, I don't think that's a wow factor. This is a lot of people discover when they first discover sexuality, that they have this attraction. And so that was just the case. And because I read Dr. Kinsey's material, first of all in the media and later when I got to university, the actual books, I knew this is not peculiar, it's not queer, it is actually rather normal, and people who think otherwise are just wrong.
I get that. But in 1941 or thereabouts, at the age of 11, the world said it was wrong. Society said it was wrong.
Yeah.
When I came out in 1995, I was told it was wrong. Society told me it was still wrong. And so, I don't know, it just seems that's why I say wow.
Well, I was a very smart kid, and I went to the so-called opportunity schools in the New South Wales education system. I generally came top in my grades, and I then began to work it out. It's natural that you think about it and you wonder, and you realise that people tell you these things are wrong. But you also know you live in an age of science and increasing knowledge about science, and that made me convinced that this is just a mistake. It was a rather arrogant thing for a young boy at 11 in 1951 to take that view, but
Yes, sorry.
that was the view I took.
Sorry, 3951, apologies. Yeah, that is really interesting, because I read the Kinsey scale and it gave me read the Kinsey documents as well, and that gave me some hope or it made me feel at peace because I knew that I wasn't different, and it also made it easier to go. So the Kinsey scale, basically, correct me, is very few people are 100% straight, very few people are 100% queer, and everyone's somewhere in between.
That's right. And Kinsey said it was a 1 to 6 scale. He divided humanity up into 1 to 6, and depending on where you were on that scale, you would go out into the world looking for a companion or looking for sexual adventures that fitted into where you were on the 1 to 6.
Your parents, did you tell them, or was it just, how did that?
I didn't tell them at first, and actually when my mother was dying, I felt I must not let my mother go without being completely honest to her. And I said, "Mum, I've got to tell you," and I blurted out the words, and she looked at me with loving and kindly eyes, and she said, Michael, you've been bringing Johan here every Sunday night for dinner for 35 years. Do you think I came down in the last shower?" And I think that's often the way with parents. They know, but in those days, everybody was so polite about it. They didn't want to mention it. They didn't want to embarrass anybody. But I basically knew that in a family with young parents and loving parents and supportive parents, that I would never be really on my own. But that isn't the experience of some gay people. They have been abandoned by their parents, abandoned by their employers, abandoned by their churches, and that's why it's important to have people in the community who say this is just wrong, and but it's a view that's taken by cardinals and bishops and so on. Well, they're just wrong, and they're unscientific. And we don't believe that the world is flat anymore, and we've just got to catch up with the science. But sadly, that's still a process in development. It's not.
I mean, there's still people today that are kicked out of home, that are ostracised from their communities for being queer.
I think it's less. I think it's much
Absolutely.
fewer than it used to be. And this is where Johan ultimately came in and said, we have essentially a moral duty to stand up. And how long do you think you're going to be around, he said to me, in our kitchen at Rose Bay. And I said, oh, well, my father is still going strong and 90. And he said, well, we owe it to younger people to make sure that they don't suffer in the same way as was attempted with us. In the Netherlands, they had abolished the criminal law in 1801, so it was long gone in the Netherlands, but social stigma and religious dogma were still there.
It was a lot more fun in the Netherlands then, I hear. I'm just being
I'm not sure about that. No, he tells me that contrary to the sort of assumption that actually, as he was growing up in the Netherlands, there were very harsh views and religion was very antagonistic, but that changed over time. And he used to go to places which used to be a church and found that they were now sex shops. And he thought that was a very good development in the right direction.
I want to talk to you about living through a time where it was criminal, deemed a crime, to decriminalisation, and sitting on the side of the law. How did that sit with you? You were a judge, you were a lawyer, and you knew it was wrong.
I didn't know it was wrong. I didn't accept that it was wrong. I knew...
Not your sexuality, I mean the laws.
Yeah, I knew that the laws were wrong. And I was never really, other than at peace with myself. It may have been in very early times when I was 11 or 12 or so that I accepted the dogma of society, but fundamentally Dr. Kinsey was my liberator, and the publicity that surrounded the Kinsey report, if you went back to the media of that time, you would find it was a big deal, and a big deal here in Australia. And later I was to be appointed to the international board of the Kinsey Institute in Bloomington, Indiana. And I've attempted in that work to pay back Dr. Kinsey for his contribution, not only to me, but to LGBTIQ people everywhere, and to straight people, so that nobody is misled by this absurd, unscientific attitude.
But in court, you're sitting there, someone comes in, or you know of another court, a man is busted at a beat being a place where someone meets and maybe has sexual activity, and they're arrested.
Well, actually, I was not appointed to the full office of a judge until the criminal law had been repealed. So I was never going to be sitting on such a case. But in terms of my psyche, I thought these people are wrong and they owe me an apology. And I'm still waiting for that apology to come forward, because Nelson Mandela broke a lot of laws in his time, and he ultimately got an apology. The pass law in South Africa was very strict, and you had to carry a pass if you were black, and he often didn't. And so people who would say to me, and there have been some journalists, I must say, who've said, oh, he was practicing homosexuality with his partner, and he knew that this was criminal and it was wrong. Well, I say to that, I deserve an apology, and I'm not any more embarrassed by that fact than Nelson Mandela was about his breaches of the pass law and other laws of apartheid.
Who should give you the apology?
Well, in our sort of society, it's given by heads of government and other people who are in a position of responsibility to represent the community. But it's not a big deal for me, and we just get on with our lives. But the really concerning thing is that leaders of religion, leaders of the religion of Jesus, are still parroting this ignorant and unscientific view about sexual orientation and sexual acts. And that is the sad thing. These are people who should be moral leaders, and instead they're really going through the hobgoblin phase of ignorant, literal, biblical approaches, which are still buzzing around in the minds of a lot of people, but fewer young people. I think it's significant, and in fact, I think it's a reason why now in the census, 50% of Australians say they're not associated with any religion, and religion has just lost it.
You've spoken before, we've spoken, and you've referred to the importance of education and Qtopia's place in that. Can you talk to that point? And because through education we become different, we change, we learn our past so we don't make mistakes in the future.
Well, education broadens the mind and informs the mind about scientific experiments, scientific investigations, and that is something that has accompanied my life. A question I sometimes ask myself was what it would have been like in the 19th century or earlier, when you didn't have the leadership of Alfred Kinsey and Evelyn Hooker and all the others who did the research on sexuality. Kinsey, you know, started off as a world expert on wasps, bees. He was a zoologist. And then ultimately he got bored with that, and he turned from study of wasps to the study of another prickly character, the human being. And I was just lucky that that happened in my lifetime.
You know that your name is up there as one of the greats that provided that safety for other people. And you said before that you and Johan said you were going to do that because you had the strength and ability to be visible and to be vocal when others don't necessarily. But you are aware how much you've changed people's lives, right?
Well, I would hope that I've contributed, but I've just been following out what my partner, Johan, who's a very determined character, told me I had to do. I said to him when he said we should stand up, I said, don't you think we should postpone this until after I've finished in the judiciary? And he slammed the table and said, no, we must do it and do it now. And so I just said, all right, Johan. And actually it's good for a human being to put all that rubbish behind them. And in some societies, it's not so easy, but it's now relatively easy for young Australians who are queer to push that away and say, well, if you think that, you're wrong, and if you press this on others, you're really not a moral person.
Language has changed. I often say that the word queer sits uncomfortably with me, or I'm coming to terms with it. But when I was younger, the word queer meant other. It had a negative connotation.
Yeah. Well, one meaning of queer does have a negative because it's suggesting peculiar and minority, whereas it is a fact that there is this spectrum, and that's what science teaches, and not only about the human species, about other sentient animals, and therefore once you know that, you've got the key to the kingdom. You can understand where it all fits in, and people have just got to adjust their prejudices to the scientific investigation and give away these ignorant attitudes. But even today in Indiana, state of the United States, where curiously this WASP expert was at the Indiana University, the legislature of the state of Indiana, Mr. Pence's state, have in the last year retaliated against the Kinsey Institute and laid down a statutory principle that no part of the money voted by the legislature to the public university of Indiana University must be spent on sexual investigation. And that's really in the here and now, that's still going on.
And that's why the fight continues, or the education continues.
Yes, well, and quite apart from our own country, it's something that is really still a very hot issue in a place like Indonesia, or even more so, a place like Afghanistan, the Caribbean, countries of Eastern Europe, and it's our duty, and I hope Utopia is going to have an internationalist outlook and not just be looking at our backyard, because we owe a duty as having got to the truth earlier than others, that we must share that knowledge with other countries.
I just want to jump back for a second. You in your 20s and your 30s in Sydney, what was the gay scene like? You mentioned Bottoms Up. Was it secretive? It was in sort of like...
Well, I didn't really know much about it because I was a student. I was anxious to do very well in my studies, and I did very well in my studies. And I didn't want to embarrass my parents. So basically, I didn't have a sexual life until I was about 27 or 28 when I met Demo, my first lover, a Spaniard. And so that was the truth of the matter. I'm not an expert. I ultimately, on the edge of 30, I began to get anxious about my coming antiquity. And that's when I really began to explore a few gay venues. Chez Ivy, which was in Bondi Junction, and the Chevron Hotel, which was in King's Cross. But they weren't many, you know. When one thinks of the large number of...
And did you have to be secretive in going in and out of them?
No, you just went in. I think, and I've heard and read, that there was an element of corruption, that the police would take money and leave certain venues alone, which is another downside of going on with an unscientific attitude. But it really wasn't much of my life. I was just down there swatting away and working hard as a young clerk in a lawyer's office to be a great success. And that I'm still doing that, and that kept me pretty busy. But fortunately, I met my partner, and I was very lucky to meet someone who was empathetic, but very definite. He is not a shy wallflower, not at all. He's very tough.
Marriage equality. You and Johan got married on your 50th anniversary, am I right?
Yes, it was on the very day of the 50th anniversary of our meeting at approximately the very hour. This was all part of my nostalgia.
What time was it?
Romantic. Well, I met Johan at about 9 p.m. and our marriage was at about 7 p.m. So it wasn't exactly the same, but
It's in the evening.
But it was not far distant, and we were actually doubtful about getting married because of the fact that they were putting gays through an extra hoop to go to a sort of plebiscite, which was carried out. But ultimately we decided that nobody was going to get a free kick at us, and therefore we were going to take part, and we were glad, and I'm glad I got my wedding ring, and that was something which the people of Australia in the vote decided should happen, and I'm glad it did.
Just took 50 years.
Well, we're looking for another 50 years, but it won't last as long as that.
Just finally, Qtopia Sydney is here in the building that was Darlinghurst Police Station. It's a site that does signify great pain for some people, but it also has been reclaimed by Qtopia for the future to signify moving forward. Do you want to talk to that?
I think we will move forward if we don't forget the past, and if we remember the suffering that was imposed on Australians, especially young Australians, but which even today is imposed on young people in other parts of the world. There's a need to share the knowledge. My concept of Qtopia is rather like the museums that I have seen in many parts of the world which memorialise the Holocaust. The way gays were treated was nothing like the Holocaust,
no.
And it was not to be equalised with that. But the way throughout the world, in many big cities, there are these places to ensure that we remember, and that we remember so that we don't repeat the wrongs of the past. And I hope that Qtopia will do this, and that we will never forget the wrongs, and that we will contribute to other countries so that they get to the same scientific approach to these things as we have.
Mr. Kirby, thank you.